In 1983, Ray Dalio had to borrow $4,000 from his father just to survive. Not because he was a bad investor, because he had no emergency fund when his business nearly collapsed. That mistake taught him the most important financial rule most people get completely backwards. Westport, Connecticut, early 1983. Ray Dalio sits in his nearly empty office at Bridgewater. His business is disintegrating. That catastrophic depression prediction from 1982 destroyed his credibility. Clients left, revenue dried up. He's down to a skeleton staff. The bills are piling up. He looks at his bank account. It's nearly empty. Business account, personal account, both running on fumes. He's got payroll due. He's got office rent. He's got his own mortgage and family expenses. And he's staring at a number that's way too small to cover everything. Here's what's interesting. Dalio understands investing. He's brilliant at analyzing markets. He knows how to build portfolios. But in this moment, all that knowledge is useless because he doesn't have cash. He has no buffer, no emergency fund, no cushion, just bills he can't pay. So he does something that's deeply humbling for a Harvard MBA who's been giving financial advice to major institutions. He picks up the phone, calls his father, and asks to borrow $4,000. His father lends him the money. No questions, no judgment. Just $4,000 to keep the business and the family afloat while Ray figures out what to do next. Now, $4,000 doesn't sound like much today, but that moment, that call to his father, that shaped how Ray Dalio thinks about money for the rest of his life. Because he realized something critical. It's not about how smart you are. It's not about how good your investments are. If you don't have a cash buffer when things go wrong, you're one crisis away from complete collapse. And here's what makes this relevant to you. Most people think the question is, should I save or should I invest? Like it's an either-or choice. Save in cash and earn 0%, or invest in compound at 8 to 12%. Obviously invest, right? Get that money growing. Wrong. That thinking is exactly what almost destroyed Dalio, and it's destroying millions of people's financial futures right now. Because the question isn't save or invest. The question is save first, then invest. In that order. And the reason has nothing to do with earning returns. It has everything to do with preventing catastrophic losses. Let me start by explaining the conventional wisdom that almost everyone follows and why it's dangerously wrong. You've probably heard some version of this advice. Start investing as early as possible. Every dollar you invest today will compound for decades. Time in the market beats timing the market. Don't wait to invest. Don't keep cash sitting around earning nothing. Get that money working for you immediately. This advice sounds logical, and for the investment industry, it's certainly profitable. The more money flowing into investment accounts, the more fees they collect. But here's what they're not telling you. This advice only works if nothing ever goes wrong in your life. And that's not how life actually works. Let me show you the math that reveals the hidden trap. When financial advisors talk about the opportunity cost of keeping cash, they show you projections. $10,000 invested at 8% annual returns becomes $21,500 in 10 years, $46,000 in 20 years, $100,000 in 30 years. Look at all that growth you're missing by keeping cash earning 0%. But that analysis is incomplete. It only looks at one side of the equation. What they don't show you is the other scenario. The scenario where you have no cash buffer and life forces you to liquidate investments at the worst possible time. That scenario destroys way more wealth than the opportunity cost of holding cash. Way more. And it happens to millions of people every single year. Here's how it plays out in real life. Someone follows the conventional advice. They invest every dollar. Their portfolio grows to $50,000 over 5 years. They're feeling good about their discipline and their returns. Then something happens. They lose their job, or their transmission dies and the car needs $4,000 of repairs. Or they have a medical emergency and the insurance doesn't cover everything. Or their basement floods. Or their kid needs emergency dental work. Life happens, and they need cash, right now. But they don't have cash. All their money is invested. So what are their options? They can put it on a credit card and pay 15 to 25% interest until they pay it off. Or they can liquidate part of their investment portfolio. Most people choose to liquidate because they don't want to carry high-interest credit card debt. So they sell some investments. Let's say they need $10,000. They log into their brokerage account, Click sell, the money transfers to their bank account in a few days, emergency solved. Except here's what they don't realize. They just destroyed their financial future.
Because here's the thing about liquidating investments during emergencies. You don't get to choose when the emergency happens. If the emergency hits when the market is up, you're okay. You sell at decent prices. But if the emergency hits when the market is down 20 or 30%, which happens regularly, by the way, you're selling at the bottom. You're locking in those losses. And worse, you're removing shares from your portfolio that would have participated in the recovery. Let me make this concrete with actual numbers, because this is critical to understand. Let's say you built a $50,000 portfolio over 5 years. You're invested in a basic stock index fund. It's November 2008. The market has crashed. Your $50,000 portfolio is now worth $35,000. It's down 30%. You're not happy about it, but you're planning to hold through the downturn. Then your car dies. You need a new used car. You need $10,000. You don't have cash, so you liquidate. But here's the math. You're not selling $10,000 worth of what you originally bought. You're selling shares that are currently down 30%. So you're actually liquidating about $14,300 worth of your original investment value to raise $10,000 in cash. Your portfolio is now down from $50,000 to $25,000. You raised $10,000 in cash for the car. You have $25,000 left invested. Now fast forward to March 2013, 5 years later. The market has recovered and then some. It's up about 80% from the November 2008 low. Your $25,000 has grown to $45,000. Not bad. But here's what you don't see. If you hadn't been forced to liquidate in November 2008, your full $35,000 would have grown to $63,000. You lost $18,000 of future value because you were forced to sell at the bottom. That $18,000 loss is way bigger than any opportunity cost from keeping an emergency fund. And get this, that emergency fund would have only cost you maybe $800 to $1,000 per year in missed investment returns if you'd kept it in cash, earning 0%. Over 5 years, that's maybe $4,000 to $5,000 in total opportunity cost. But the forced liquidation cost you $18,000. The emergency fund would have been cheaper by a factor of almost 4. This is what Ray Dalio learned in 1982 through 83. When his business nearly collapsed, he had no cash buffer. If he'd been forced to liquidate any personal investments during that period, when markets and his confidence were both destroyed, he would have locked in catastrophic losses. The $4,000 loan from his father, humiliating as it was, prevented a much worse outcome. And that experience fundamentally changed how Dalio thinks about cash. He realized that emergency funds aren't about earning returns. They're about preventing catastrophic forced liquidation. The value of cash isn't the interest it earns. The value of cash is the losses it prevents. This is a perfect example of what Dalio calls protecting the downside. He has this principle in his book. Protect the downside and the upside takes care of itself. Most people focus on optimizing the upside. How do I get the highest returns? How do I compound as fast as possible? But Dalio learned that protecting the downside is more important. Because if you blow up on the downside, you never get to enjoy the upside. The emergency fund protects your downside. It prevents forced liquidation. It prevents high-interest debt. It prevents you from having to make desperate financial decisions during crises. Once that downside is protected, your investments can compound without interruption. The upside takes care of itself. Now let me talk about the psychological aspect of this, because it's just as important as the math. When you have no emergency fund, you're investing from a position of weakness. You're financially fragile. Any unexpected expense becomes a crisis. Any market downturn makes you nervous because you're worried you might need to sell. That psychological fragility leads to bad decisions. I've seen this over and over. People with no emergency funds panic during market downturns, not because they're irrational, but because they know they're financially fragile. They know that if anything goes wrong in their life, they'll have to sell. So they're tempted to sell preemptively before things get worse. That panic selling is absolutely devastating to long-term returns. But when you have a solid emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of expenses in cash, you invest from a position of strength. You're financially robust. Unexpected expenses aren't crises. They're just life. You handle them with your emergency fund and move on. And market downturns don't make you nervous because you know you're not going to be forced to sell. Your liquidity needs are covered. That psychological strength allows you to make better investment decisions. You can stay invested through market crashes. You can rebalance into declining assets when they're cheap. You can actually benefit from volatility instead of being destroyed by it. The emergency fund gives you emotional resilience that translates into better long-term returns. This is another one of Dalio's insights from his 1982 failure. He realized that he made terrible decisions when he was financially desperate. That depression prediction was driven partly by analysis, but also partly by desperation. He needed to be right. He needed clients. He needed revenue. That desperation clouded his judgment. After he rebuilt, he made sure he was never in that desperate position again. The emergency fund was part of that. Once he had liquidity, he could make decisions from a position of strength rather than weakness. That changed everything about how he approached risk.
Now, let me address the most common objection I hear when I talk about emergency funds. People say, but I'm young, I have decades until retirement. I should be investing aggressively, not sitting on cash earning 0%. This sounds logical, but it's based on a misunderstanding of what the emergency fund is for. The emergency fund isn't for retirement, it's for next week, next month, next year. You don't know when you'll need emergency cash. Could be tomorrow, could be 6 months from now. The emergency fund covers short-term uncertainty so your long-term investments can stay invested. Think about it this way. Let's say you're 25 years old. You've got 40 years until retirement. You're right that you should be investing aggressively for those 40 years. But here's the question. Do you think anything unexpected will happen in the next year? Of course it will. Cars break down. People lose jobs. Medical issues arise. Relationships end. Life happens. If you have no cash buffer, those short-term emergencies disrupt your long-term investment program. You're forced to liquidate. You're taking on high-interest debt. You're making desperate decisions. The emergency fund prevents short-term life events from derailing your long-term wealth building. It's not competing with your 40-year investment horizon. It's protecting it. And here's what's interesting. The emergency fund actually allows you to invest more aggressively. When you know your short-term liquidity is covered, you can put everything else into growth assets. You can handle the volatility because you're not worried about needing to sell. The cash buffer enables aggressive investing by removing the liquidity constraint. I saw this with my own situation years ago. I'll tell you the story because it illustrates the point perfectly. I was in my late 20s. I'd been investing every dollar I could. No cash buffer, just aggressive investing because I'd read all the conventional advice about time in the market. My portfolio was growing. I felt smart about my discipline. Then I got laid off. Completely unexpected. The company had financial problems. They did a round of cuts. I was out. And suddenly I needed cash for rent, food, car payment, health insurance, all the normal expenses, but no paycheck coming in. I had no emergency fund, so I had to start liquidating my portfolio to cover expenses while I looked for a new job. This was early 2009, right after the market had crashed. I was selling at absolutely terrible prices, and every week I didn't find a job, I had to sell more. It was psychologically devastating. I was watching my investment portfolio, which I'd worked so hard to build, just getting destroyed. I eventually found a new job, took about 3 months, but by that point, I'd liquidated about 40% of my portfolio, and I missed the entire recovery. Those shares I sold at the bottom in 2009, they went on to triple and quadruple over the next 5 years. I wasn't holding them.
That forced liquidation probably cost me $100,000 or more in future value. After that experience, the first thing I did was build an emergency fund. 6 months of expenses. Took me about a year to fully fund it. And once it was funded, I invested aggressively. But this time, I had a foundation. When the next market crash came, I didn't have to sell. When I had car repairs or medical bills or any other unexpected expense, I handled it with cash. My investment portfolio never got touched. That's the power of the emergency fund. It's not about the returns you earn on the cash, it's about the disruptions you prevent. And over decades, preventing disruptions to your compound growth trajectory is worth way more than the opportunity cost of holding cash. Now, let me give you the specific implementation framework because I want this to be actionable. Here's exactly how to think about building and maintaining your emergency fund. Step 1 is calculating the right size. The standard advice is 3 to 6 months of expenses, but I want you to be more precise than that. First, distinguish between your total expenses and your essential expenses. Total expenses include everything you spend. Essential expenses are the things you must pay to survive. Rent or mortgage, basic food, utilities, insurance, minimum debt payments, transportation if you need it for work, healthcare. That's it. Everything else is non-essential. During an emergency, you can cut non-essential expenses. You're not going out to restaurants, you're not buying new clothes, you're not taking vacations, you're in survival mode. So your emergency fund only needs to cover essential expenses, not your full lifestyle. For most people, essential expenses are about 50 to 70% of total expenses. If you normally spend $4,000 per month, your essential expenses might be $3,000. That's your baseline number. Multiply that by 3 for your minimum emergency fund, multiply by 6 for your maximum. So in this example, $9,000 minimum, $18,000 maximum. Now, where in that range should you aim? That depends on your specific situation. If you have stable employment, low fixed costs, and good insurance, you can probably get away with 3 to 4 months. If you have variable income, high fixed costs, dependents, or you work in an unstable industry, aim for 6 months or more. I personally keep 6 months because I value the psychological security. Some people are comfortable with 3. The key is that you've thought about it intentionally based on your specific situation rather than just following a generic rule. Step 2 is where to keep the emergency fund. This is critical. It needs to be liquid, safe, and separate. Liquid means you can access it within a day or two without penalties. Safe means the principal doesn't fluctuate. No stocks, no bonds, no crypto. Just cash or cash equivalents. And separate means it's not mixed with your regular checking account where you might accidentally spend it.
The best option for most people is a high-yield savings account and an online bank. Currently, late 2025, these are paying around 4%. Not amazing, but better than zero. And critically, the money is FDIC insured up to $250,000. You're not taking any principal risk. And you can usually transfer money to your checking account electronically within 1 to 2 business days. That's liquid enough for almost any emergency. Some people use money market funds. Those work too. Slightly higher returns usually, similar liquidity, similar safety. The key is that it's not in your brokerage account mixed with your investments. It needs to be psychologically separate. When you look at your investment portfolio, you shouldn't see the emergency fund. It's a different bucket. Step 3 is the building process. If you're starting from zero, this takes time. Don't expect to build a $15,000 emergency fund overnight unless you get a windfall. For most people, this is a 6 to 18-month process of consistent saving. Here's how to structure it. Calculate your target emergency fund. Let's say $15,000. Calculate how much you can realistically save per month. Let's say $500. That's 30 months to fully fund it. Too long. You're gonna lose motivation. Instead, set up milestone targets. First milestone is $1,000. At $500 per month, that's 2 months. Achievable. You can see progress quickly. Once you hit 1,000, you've got some cushion. Not a full emergency fund, but something. Next milestone is 3,000. Another 4 months. Total 6 months from start. Now you've got enough to handle most minor emergencies. Car repair, medical copays, small stuff.
Still not enough for job loss, but you're building. Next milestone is 6,000, another 6 months. Total 12 months from start. Now you've got about 2 months of essential expenses, starting to look like a real emergency fund. You can handle bigger issues without immediately going into crisis mode. Next milestone is your full target, another 18 months. Total 30 months from start. But here's the thing, because you set up milestones, you felt progress along the way. You didn't just grind for 30 months watching a number slowly increase. You hit wins at 2 months, 6 months, 12 months. That psychological structure helps you stay motivated. And here's a critical point during the building phase. While you're building your emergency fund, you should still invest something. Not aggressively, but something. Why? Because you're building the habit. If you completely stop investing for 18 or 30 months while you build your emergency fund, you're going to lose momentum. You might not restart when the emergency fund is complete. So here's what I recommend. During the building phase, contribute enough to your 401k to get your employer match if you have one. That's free money. Don't leave it on the table. But beyond that, everything goes to the emergency fund. Once the emergency fund is complete, flip the switch. Everything that was going to the emergency fund now goes to investments. This way, you're building the savings habit. You're getting used to living on less than you earn. And when the emergency fund is complete, you don't have to change your lifestyle. You just redirect where that monthly savings goes. Same amount, different destination. That's a much easier psychological transition than trying to suddenly start saving for the first time after years of spending everything. Now, let me talk about what counts as an emergency, because this is where people mess up. They build an emergency fund and then they drain it for things that aren't actually emergencies. Then, when the real emergency hits, they're back to forced liquidation or credit card debt. An emergency has 3 characteristics. It's unexpected, necessary, and urgent. All 3. If it doesn't meet all 3 criteria, it's not an emergency. It's a planned expense that you should save separately for. Unexpected means you didn't see it coming. Your car transmission dies? Unexpected. You want to replace your car because it's old but still working? Not unexpected. That's a planned upgrade. You should have been saving separately for that. Necessary means you have to handle it. It's not optional. Medical emergency? Necessary. New TV because yours is old but functional? Not necessary. That's a want, not a need. Save separately for it. Urgent means it can't wait. It needs to be handled now or very soon. Broken furnace in January when it's 10 degrees outside? Urgent. Wanting to remodel your kitchen? Not urgent. Save separately for it. Here are some examples. Job loss where you need to cover expenses while finding work. Unexpected, necessary, urgent. Emergency. Major medical expense not covered by insurance. Unexpected, necessary, urgent. Emergency. Car breaks down and you need it for work. Unexpected, necessary, urgent. Emergency. Vacation. Not unexpected, not necessary, not urgent. Not an emergency. Holiday gifts. Not unexpected, not urgent. Not an emergency. Down payment on a house. Not unexpected, not urgent, not an emergency. These are all expenses you should be saving for in separate buckets, not draining your emergency fund. The discipline to leave your emergency fund alone except for true emergencies is what makes the whole system work. If you drain it for non-emergencies, it won't be there when the real emergency hits. Then you're back to the forced liquidation or credit card debt trap. I've seen people drain their emergency fund 3 or 4 times for non-emergencies. Then they wonder why they're constantly stressed about money. It's because they're not actually maintaining a cash buffer. They're treating the emergency fund like a general savings account. That defeats the entire purpose. Now let me talk about the opportunity cost calculation more carefully because I want you to understand the real trade-off. Yes, there is an opportunity cost to keeping cash earning low returns instead of investing it, but that opportunity cost is smaller than most people think, and the insurance value is larger than most people realize.
Let's run the numbers precisely. You keep $15,000 in a high-yield savings account earning 4%. That's $600 per year. If that money were instead invested at 8% annual returns, it would earn $1,200 per year. The opportunity cost is $600 per year. That's $50 per month. Now let's say you earn $50,000 per year after taxes. $50 per month is about 1.2% of your income. You're essentially paying a 1.2% insurance premium to protect against forced liquidation. Is that worth it? Well, what's the alternative scenario? No emergency fund. You invest all $15,000. It grows nicely, then you have an emergency during a market downturn. You're forced to liquidate when the market is down 30%. That forced liquidation costs you way more than $50 per month in opportunity cost. Let me show you with actual numbers. Your $15,000 invested grows to $20,000 over a few years. Market crashes 30%, now it's $14,000. You need $10,000 for an emergency. You liquidate. But you're actually liquidating $14,300 of your original principal to raise $10,000 cash. Your portfolio is now down to $4,000. Market recovers, your $4,000 grows back to $8,000. But if you'd had an emergency fund, your $20,000 would have just stayed invested through the crash, would have dropped to $14,000, would have recovered to $28,000. You gave up $20,000 of future value by being forced to liquidate. That's way more than the $600 per year opportunity cost of the emergency fund. The math is clear. The insurance is worth the premium. Way worth it. And that's not even counting the psychological value of financial security, not lying awake at night worrying about unexpected expenses, not panicking during market crashes because you know you won't be forced to sell, not making desperate financial decisions. That psychological value is hard to quantify, but it's real. This is exactly what Dalio came to understand after his 1982 crisis. He realized that financial resilience is worth paying for. The emergency fund is the foundation of that resilience. Once he had that foundation, he could take intelligent risks with his investments because his downside was protected. Now let me talk about maintaining the emergency fund over time, because it's not just build it once and forget it. Your financial situation changes. Your expenses change. The emergency fund needs to adapt. Here's how to think about maintenance. Every year, typically in January when you're doing financial planning anyway, recalculate your essential monthly expenses. Did they go up because of rent increases? Did they go down because you paid off a loan? Adjust your emergency fund target accordingly. If your essential expenses increased from $3,000 per month to $3,500 per month, your emergency fund should increase from $18,000 to $21,000. Also think about whether your risk profile changed. Did you change jobs to a less stable industry? Maybe increase from 4 months to 6 months of expenses. Did you have a kid? Definitely increase your emergency fund because your expenses just went up and your risk of unexpected costs just skyrocketed. Kids get sick. They need stuff. Increase the buffer. On the flip side, did you pay off your mortgage? Your essential expenses probably dropped significantly. Maybe you can reduce your emergency fund target from 6 months to 4 months and redirect some of that cash to investments. The emergency fund should be right-sized for your current situation, not oversized or undersized. And here's the critical maintenance rule. If you ever have to tap your emergency fund for an actual emergency, your top financial priority becomes rebuilding it. Not investing more, not upgrading your lifestyle, rebuilding the emergency fund. Because you're now exposed, you're financially fragile again until that buffer is rebuilt. I learned this lesson. There was a period where I had a series of actual emergencies over about 18 months. Car accident, medical issue, home repair. Each one I handled with my emergency fund, which was great. I didn't have to disrupt my investments. But by the end of that 18 months, my emergency fund was drained from 6 months down to about 2 months. I was exposed. So I paused my aggressive investing, redirected everything to rebuilding the emergency fund. It took about 6 months to get it back to the full 6-month target. Only then did I resume aggressive investing. That discipline of rebuilding before optimizing is what keeps the system working. This is part of Dalio's systematic thinking. The system has rules. One of those rules is maintaining adequate liquidity. When liquidity drops below the minimum threshold, rebuilding it becomes the priority. The system doesn't care how you feel about it or whether the market is going up. The rule is the rule. Follow it. Let me also address a common situation. People say, I have access to a home equity line of credit. That's my emergency fund. I don't need cash. This is dangerous thinking. Yes, a HELOC gives you access to cash quickly, but it has 2 problems. First, it's debt. When you tap a HELOC, you're borrowing against your home at whatever interest rate the HELOC charges. Currently, that's probably 7 to 9%. You're now carrying that debt until you pay it off. Your emergency just became way more expensive than if you'd used a cash emergency fund. And second, and more importantly, HELOCs can be frozen or reduced during financial crises. This actually happened to millions of people during the 2008 crash. Banks got scared. They froze home equity lines. People who thought they had access to $100,000 in emergency liquidity suddenly had access to zero, right when they needed it most during layoffs and financial stress.
A cash emergency fund can't be frozen. It's your money, in your account, accessible regardless of what banks or markets are doing. That reliability is part of its value. Don't rely on borrowed liquidity for emergencies. Maintain actual cash reserves. Same thing with credit cards. People say, I'll just put emergencies on my credit card and pay it off over time. Okay, but now your emergency is costing you 15 to 25% annual interest. A $10,000 emergency on a credit card at 20% interest costs you $2,000 per year until it's paid off. That's way more expensive than the opportunity cost of keeping an emergency fund. Plus, carrying credit card debt is psychologically stressful. It's mentally draining to have that debt hanging over you. The emergency fund prevents that stress. Handle the emergency with cash. Move on with your life. No debt, no lingering financial burden. That psychological clean resolution is part of the value. So here's the framework summary, because I want this to be crystal clear. Build an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months of essential expenses before investing aggressively. Keep it in a separate, liquid, safe account. Use it only for true emergencies that are unexpected, necessary, and urgent. Maintain it over time as your situation changes. Rebuild it immediately if you have to tap it. That's the foundation. Once that foundation is solid, invest everything else aggressively. Let your investments compound without interruption. Let the emergency fund do its job of protecting your downside. That's how you build wealth sustainably over decades. Ray Dalio learned this through catastrophic failure and humiliation. He had to borrow money from his father at age 33 because he didn't have a cash buffer when his business imploded. That experience shaped his entire philosophy of risk management. Protect the downside first, build liquidity, remove the forced liquidation risk, then optimize for growth. This isn't exciting advice. It's not going to get you rich next year, but it's going to prevent you from getting poor when unexpected things happen. And over the course of a lifetime, preventing poverty is more important than optimizing wealth. The emergency fund keeps you in the game. It prevents catastrophic exits. It protects your compound growth trajectory. And here's what's beautiful about this approach. Once your emergency fund is complete, you can actually invest more aggressively with confidence. You can hold through market crashes because you know you won't be forced to sell. You can rebalance into declining assets because your liquidity is covered. You can take intelligent risks because your downside is protected. The emergency fund doesn't prevent aggressive investing. It enables it. By removing the liquidity constraint, you free yourself to pursue long-term growth without worrying about short-term volatility. That's the power of protecting your downside first. So here's what I want you to do right now. Pause this video, pull up your bank account, look at how much cash you have available. Calculate your essential monthly expenses, multiply by 3. That's your minimum emergency fund target. Do you have it? If not, that's your top financial priority. Not investing more, not buying stuff, building that cash buffer. If you do have an adequate emergency fund, congratulations, you're ahead of most people. Now make sure it's properly maintained. Is it in a separate account? Is it the right size for your current situation? Have you used it for non-emergencies? If any of those answers are concerning, fix them. The emergency fund is the foundation of financial resilience. Ray Dalio learned this the hard way. You can learn it the easy way by just implementing the system now. Build the buffer, protect your downside, then invest aggressively for your upside. That's the path to sustainable wealth building. Now I want to hear from you. Do you have an emergency fund? How many months of expenses do you have saved? If you've had to use it for an actual emergency, what happened? Share your experience in the comments because learning from each other's stories helps everyone build better financial habits. If you found this valuable, hit that like button and subscribe.
We're releasing new Ray Dalio deep dives regularly, breaking down the principles and decisions that built one of the most successful investment firms in history. You don't want to miss them. I'm your host. This is legendary investor Ray Dalio, and I'll see you in the next one.